outsider. Now, I'm a physicist, I'm an optical physicist, but I made a career transition about half a career ago for history of science. So since that time, I've looked at this from the viewpoint of an historian more than as a scientist. So perhaps I should begin with an obvious question. Why concern yourself with history at all? Who cares? Well, for me, holography is not just another subject, and that's not because I did it as a high school student. It's not because I have a particular love of it, I do, but it's because holography is a very unusual subject. Holography is not like other aspects of physics. It's a subject that's attracted a wide range of people with a wide range of goals, each with their own personal perspective on what it is it's about. It has a 60-year hidden history that's involved about 20,000 people. 20,000 people. Now, you don't know those 20,000 people. You probably can count about 400 or 500, each of you. But each of you probably counts a different 400 or 500. It's grown up from a fractured past, from classified labs to car factories, from artists to businessmen, from hippies to science fiction writers. There has never been a technology with so many groups that affected so many groups so differently. Now, even more importantly, the subject has attracted competing meanings. For some, it's a fertile scientific tool. For others, it's a unique medium for aesthetic expression. For others, a promising commercial niche. And yet, for others, a metaphor for understanding consciousness or the nature of reality. Now, as a historian, I'm fascinated by the different versions of history that have been constructed by different groups of you involved in holography. It's been a symbol that's been a symbol of inevitable progress for some, or a moral tale to others about the triumph of geniuses. So under one term then, holography, we have a science, a technology, an art, a product, an understanding of the world, even visions of the future. In short, a phenomenon wrapped up in modern culture. Let me introduce these ideas with an historical artifact. This is a page from one of the notebooks kept by Urus Upatnieks. Now, no one talks about Urus Upatnieks, but he was the co-worker with Emmett Leith in the early 1960s who made this field happen. He's still alive, he still has his notebooks in his attic, he's still very active, and he's considerably younger than Emmett Leith. Now, this notebook shows early reconstructions of diffusely illuminated holograms and three-dimensional holograms. This kind of document really clarifies how people were thinking near the moment of discovery, how they understood it, and how they forecast its possibilities. Now, this became the first famous hologram, and the publishers of the book that I wrote decided that this would be the appropriate picture for the cover. So I began looking at the photograph on my computer screen, trying to see whether it was good enough quality, high enough resolution, and so on. But this photograph shows something more, and it's a nice illustration of what historical research is about. When I examined it on the computer screen, I enlarged it and brightened it for reproduction. I saw what looked like background noise, and then with further brightening, Urus Upatnieks' face. Now, he took this photograph 40 years after he had put it into his notebook. You can see him holding the camera above his head. And it's a very nice illustration of the man behind the hologram. So it shows the person behind the hologram literally and figuratively. Now, this is a visual metaphor for history itself. Holography was shaped by people working in distinct environments. Priority and patent disputes have been a chronic feature of this field, but they promote a very artificial and troublesome history. If you're trying to defend a patent, if you're trying to defend priority, the history you write is a very peculiar history. It's a history that has a point of origin. And it's a history that has a point of origin in one thought. And that's not reality. That's not the way holography was. My purpose as an historian of science and technology was to try and understand how a new subject comes to be. How does it materialize? How does its content stabilize? How do specialists like you come to see yourselves as a distinct group, as a distinct tribe? And how does all this depend on where and when it's done? Well, for historians, these are big questions of deep interest. Now, they may not fascinate you, but they fascinate me. Now, I'd argue that the new subject of holography wasn't three-dimensional, it was four-dimensional. First, there was an intellectual dimension. It was a collection of jostling, unsettling, unmatching new concepts. Second, it was a material dimension. Holograms were a new medium that could be used for visual purposes and many other less obvious uses. Third, holography has a social dimension. It created new kinds of specialist and new kinds of audience. And fourth, it had an economic and popular dimension. So holography created concepts and a medium and an identity and a popular response. We can't find a moment of origin for this. We've talked today about Denis Gabor, Yuri Denisyuk, Emmett Leith, and others. It grew gradually from at least those three separate roots. From the late 1940s to the early 1950s, Denis Gabor's concept was what he called holoscopy. Now, that's not a word very well known today, but that's what Denis Gabor used. He never sought to exploit the principle, merely its application for microscopy. And his collaborators called it not holoscopy, but diffraction microscopy, or even Gaboroscopy. The second route was Yuri Denisyuk's work at the Vavilov Institute, which produced wave photography, nothing like Gaboroscopy. And the third route was the Willow Run research on lensless photography, which was nothing like the other two. And it wasn't until 1966 or so that people began to see that these were three aspects of more or less the same generalized subject. By the end of 1965, the term holography had been coined, and by early 1966, we don't know where, holographers came to be. So that's where they came from, but we can't quite say who thought of it or who was the first to call himself or herself a holographer. By the time holography was named, Denis Gabor had retired. He was the trigger for that first wave. Leith and Denisyuk were the second wave. And everybody who came after that was the third wave. So it didn't start in the 1970s, it didn't even start in the 1960s. It had started 20 years before that, on a very small scale, a very rudimentary scale. That third wave were the people who called themselves holographers. So who were holographers then? Well, I'm sure it's obvious to all of you at Lake Forest conferences, this kind of conference in particular, that holographers weren't one type of person. There were at least three types. In retrospect, we can pick out three distinct strands: scientific, artisanal, and aesthetic. Let me show just a few photographs to illustrate these ideas and to fit people to the categories. Here's a picture of Steve Benton in 1972. In 1972, Steve Benton wasn't very well known. He was a junior researcher. He didn't have much of a reputation. He wasn't broadly known around the world. He didn't have acolytes. The first holographers, and by far the most numerous, were scientists and engineers like Benton. And Leith and Upatniek's work was, after their work was publicized in 1964, holography exploded. Now, this is a picture of part of the crowd of a Gordon conference in 1972. Here's the whole group. And all of these groups were scientists, and just about all of them were Americans. So this was one of the first groups to define themselves as a coherent group of people, a coherent group of scientific holographers. And these conferences were the means of making that identity very robust. But they weren't the only type. Lloyd Cross, in effect, was the founder of a new kind of tribe, an artisanal tribe. From this homogeneous cluster, another popular type emerged, artisans. And one of the first artisans was Lloyd Cross. Cross had been a research associate at Willow Run, so he came from the very same kind of people that employed Emmett Leith. Very same place. Not part of Leith's group, but part of Willow Run. The picture on the left is one that very few people have seen. It's Cross as a good orthodox scientist wearing a tie. And Cross was one of the first founders of a laser company, a company called Trion Instruments in Ann Arbor. He went to university in Ann Arbor, he worked in Ann Arbor. But he left Ann Arbor. He met artists in Ann Arbor who became interested in holography, and he himself got interested around 1967. And he began taking it up with artists. He founded an art studio, he made an art show, and they gradually moved around America from New York to Arizona to San Francisco. And at San Francisco, an artisanal tribe flourished. He and Jerry Pethick, the man on the upper right, very few photos of Pethick, founded the San Francisco School of Holography in 1971. It was a counterculture technical commune. That's probably the best description we can give. It sought to create holograms with low-cost, homemade equipment and without any of the connections of military funding. So this is a group of people, most of whom had no scientific background. Cross was, in effect, the lone scientist. Most came from other disciplines. Most had art school backgrounds. Many were simply inspired by the zeal of holography. And Cross's school gave them the chance for the first time to take up this field. Artisans weren't like scientists in another way. There were women among them. For the first time, women entered the field of holography in an important way. The third tribe, the third kind of group, were artists. And artists weren't artisans, and they weren't scientists. These were three separate, immiscible groups of people. Women were even more involved as artists. They made up about a third to a half in some places. Artists began to take up holography around 1968-69. Two of the best-known early ones were Margaret Benyon on the top left and Harriet Caston Silver on the bottom right, working in Boston. By the late 1970s, there were several dozen art holographers around the world. And by that time, there were probably several hundred artisans and several thousand scientists. Individuals had an important role here. These separate groups remained largely separate right through the 1970s. You can think back to your own backgrounds, think of your own experiences, how it was. Here again, though, individual actions had a significant influence. One of the third wave of holographers was Tung Jong, TJ. His first summer courses on holography were held in 1971-72 at Lake Forest, a year after the San Francisco group. And courses like that opened up the field to artisans, to hobbyists, to people off the street. The first Lake Forest Symposium was a different kind of conference. There hadn't been conferences like this before. There hadn't been scientific domains that were inhabited by artists and artisans and entrepreneurs. This was a new field, a very unusual field even today. It brought together these three separate tribes, and it brought them together for the first time quite effectively in 1982. These were exciting sociable events, and all the people I've interviewed, some 60 people, many of them mentioned the Lake Forest conferences as being important in their careers, important in their lives. This was something that gave them a new zeal for the subject. Holography was also about creating a medium. Less noticed by holographers was that they were creating special ways of doing things, special equipment. And to my mind, my historian's mind, this is the most interesting aspect. Just let me illustrate it with a picture. This is Juris Upatnieks at a Willow Run optical table around 1965. Now, Willow Run had a culture of heavy equipment. It had a culture of ample funding. It had a culture of lots of money, lots of heavy equipment, lots of staff to get big jobs done. The equipment mirrored the environment. The equipment mirrored the culture itself. The physical stability of the equipment matched the social stability of the teams at Willow Run. Now compare that to the San Francisco School. The San Francisco School, they popularized sandbox holography. How did that differ from the granite table? Well, sandboxes could be made cheaply. They didn't demand budgets. They didn't demand long-term exposure. They didn't demand long-term involvement. And you could pack up a sand table in an afternoon and move it to another rented garage or another rented basement. So just like the equipment, the social environment matched the equipment itself. They were nice matches for each other. And from it grew, by the late 1970s, what could be called public access holography, thanks in part to Fred Unterseyer and others. There was also a fourth dimension to this, and that was creating a market and popular appeal. Holographers proselytized. They exhibited, they produced, they sold holograms. They forecast their future. And all of this had unexpected results. Let me just show a few pictures of economic experiments. Companies, even large companies like IBM and CBS, have been trying since the mid-1960s to create a market for holograms. But the main economic interest was from military funders. Not until the late 1970s did a commercial market begin to look likely, and it was spurred by large popular exhibitions of holograms. The first company to develop holography in a big way was Conductron Corporation in Ann Arbor. So the same city had roots for artisans, scientists, and entrepreneurs. Conductron produced 500,000 holograms in 1966 for World Book Encyclopedia. It looked for markets in advertising displays. It developed pulsed holography for the first time. It made the first pulsed portraits. It made the first artists' portraits with Bruce Nauman. This was a company that tried everything it could to find a market. But all of these well-funded early initiatives failed quite quickly, and every single holographer at Conductron ended up doing something else. Most of them ended up engineering cars in Detroit. While big firms were failing to attract much public attention, exhibitions and galleries did. And the late 70s especially, were the decade of big exhibitions. One of the first organizers was Posey Jackson, who we heard about this morning. She was the first director of the New York Museum of Holography, and that museum, like TJ's Lake Forest conferences, played an important role in bringing together different groups of holographers. She subsequently founded the Shearwater Foundation that funded generations of art holographers. And exhibitions during the 1970s attracted literally hundreds of thousands of people and spurred the commercial production of display holograms for individuals to buy and display in their homes. This wasn't just an American or a European phenomenon, it was around the world. It was as important in the Soviet Union as it was in Asia, as in North America. Galleries came after the exhibitions. Galleries required small-scale entrepreneurs for production, and there was a chain of activity for the first time that was self-perpetuating. Big business got involved again in the 1980s, hoping to pick up on the same ideal, but again, a lot of the large companies failed to attract as much interest as they expected. Products went from high science to aesthetic holograms down to children's comic books. So there was a kind of devolution of products. And today, as we all know, none of us here think this way, but most of the general public think of holograms in two quite incompatible ways. Either as the embossed product we see ubiquitously on security products around the world, or as a Star Trek creation, a kind of mythical hologram that most holographers don't ever hope to achieve. These are two totally different, bifurcated visions of what holography is, and neither of them corresponds to what we're doing here. So neither of them is that much involved in display holography. So it's interesting that holography took a very sharp change of direction in the 1980s. Let me just finish with a few trends. Looking at history, we can begin to see some large-scale trends. This is a rich story of people, places, and products, but there have been some very notable trends. First of all, applications and products have always been elusive. We've got a 40-year history of looking for products, a 40-year history of trying to find the right niche, and the niches don't seem to last as long as we'd hope. Second, a reason for the poor financial return was that forecasts were usually wildly unpredictable. Corporations of the 60s had touted holograms as a futuristic technology, and that was difficult to live up to. In fact, only the science fiction writers of today continue to portray holography in quite that 1960s way. They took the prediction of the 1960s from Conductron and they created Star Trek. The third trend is that forecasters frequently misread the public reaction to holography. During the 1980s, holograms finally entered the public awareness in the form of embossed reflective images, but ubiquity had a price. Fine art holograms found themselves competing with a cheaper, ubiquitous alternative. As a result, the perception of holograms by the public remained very different from what they mean to holographers. Can such trends tell us much about the future? Well, over the past 60 years, the forecasts have usually been wrong. So if nothing else, we should distrust forecasts. We should expect diversions. We should expect the field to go in a new, unpredictable direction. But holography continues to enthuse people. It's a magical field that continues to enthuse people in completely unpredictable ways. These enthusiasms have had an unusually potent role in shaping the subject. They've pulled and pushed it in new directions. They've continually redefined what holography is and what it's for. And based on the past 6 decades, we can expect more of the same creative chaos. Holography has a long and interesting past, and as the titles of the paper at this conference suggest, it has a fascinating future too. Thank you.
En este momento el precio de Bitcoin es muy económico. At the moment the price of Bitcoin is very cheap. Pero casi todo el mundo tiene muy poco dinero para invertir. But almost everybody has very little money to invest. Debería decir que esta idea me vino hoy especialmente cuando vi otra vez una chica ahí pidiendo dinero por la calle. Actually, I must say first, this idea today I got especially when I saw again one girl begging for money in the streets. Me gustaría ayudar, pero yo tampoco me sobra mucho el dinero. I would really like to help everybody, but I don't have either too much money. And así que me vino la siguiente idea. So I got the following idea. Es más bien un juego. It's rather a game. Lo que es muy importante, elegir un monedero de Bitcoin que solo tú misma tienes la llave privada. What is very important to choose Bitcoin wallet company which you only possess the private key. For example, blockchain.info. Por ejemplo, la empresa blockchain.info. Luego, imprimir en papel la llave privada y también guardarlo tú mismo. Then to print in paper the private key and of course save for yourself that private key. Bueno, ya estamos imprimiendo, imprime por lo menos 10. So now we are already printing, so at least print 10 directions, 10 direcciones. Luego pones algo de Bitcoin, una cantidad, lo que te da la gana en esta dirección. Then you put some Bitcoin, the amount, whatever you want, in these directions. Y la próxima vez que sales de casa ya tienes algo que dar a los que están ahí pidiendo por la calle. And the next time you go out of the house, you have already something to give for these people who are begging on the streets. Y por ejemplo, y claro, para tus amigos, amigas, and for your friends, of course. Eso da motivación a la gente para aprender Bitcoin y this gives motivation for the people to learn about Bitcoin. Y la parte del juego consiste en lo siguiente, and the game part consists in the following. Explicas a la gente, mira, esta es la clave privada, que es la clave secreta. you explain to the people, look, this is the private key, which must be secret, and you have it, and me, and explicas, esa persona y yo mismo la tiene. Y antes pensaba en 5 años, pero luego cambié un poco de idea de hasta 4 años. First I thought of 5 years, but then I changed my opinion to 4 years, later explain. Después lo explico por qué. Les dices, mira, tienes 4 años para poner esta cantidad de Bitcoin a otra dirección. Si no lo has quitado después de 4 años, yo lo quito. So you explain them, you have 4 years to take this Bitcoin out of this direction, of this secret key direction. If you don't do it, I do it after these 4 years, so you lose this. That's this part of the game, es la parte del juego. He creado este hashtag BTC4 para hacerlo un poco popular. I created this hashtag BTC4 to make it a little popular. Antes pensaba en 5 años, pero luego cambié a 4 porque te has dado cuenta que en Los Simpson la gente tiene 4 dedos y solo Dios tiene 5 dedos. First, I thought of 5 years, but then I changed my mind to 4 years. Did you notice that in The Simpsons, people have 4 fingers and only God has 5 fingers? I'll show some pictures. Voy a enseñar algunas imágenes de Los Simpsons, de los manos y dedos de Simpsons. Some pictures of the hands and fingers of Simpsons. Pero antes quiero recordar que es muy probable que en también 4 o 5 en los próximos años el valor de Bitcoin puede subir mucho. Just want to remember before that the price of Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin can rise very much in these next years. Así que si solo pones una cantidad pequeña, más tarde puede ser de gran ayuda. Even if you just put a little small amount, later it can be big help. No solo para, bueno, es un juego. Si la persona lo quita antes de 4 años, es para esta persona. Si no, es para ti, si te recuerdas y guardas bien la llave privada. So this is the game part. If the person takes the money out, it's for that person. But if they forget it after these 4 years, you can take it out. And it can be really...
Bueno, imprimir también la llave pública y la llave privada. Y si, por ejemplo, okay, first translate. Print not just the private key, but also the public key. Así que si, por ejemplo, explicas a la gente, mira, si alguna persona quiere enviarte Bitcoin, pero tú no tienes ninguna dirección, así que puedes dar esta llave pública a la persona. Mira, muy bien, la llave pública, no la llave secreta. das a esa persona o cualquier persona y te pueden enviar Bitcoin a esa dirección. So remember, the public key you can give to anybody, and if somebody wants to send you some Bitcoin and this person doesn't have any, so you have already this public address where they can send you Bitcoin.
¿Qué es Bitcoin? Bitcoin es la primera moneda digital descentralizada. Los Bitcoins son monedas digitales que puedes enviar a través de Internet. Comparado con otras alternativas, Bitcoin tiene numerosas ventajas. Los Bitcoins son transferidos directamente de persona a persona a través de la red sin pasar por un banco u otro intermediario. Esto significa que las comisiones son mucho menores, puedes usarlo en cualquier país, tu cuenta no puede ser congelada y no hay prerequisitos o límites arbitrarios. Miremos cómo funciona. Los Bitcoins son generados en todo Internet por cualquiera con un programa gratuito llamado minero de Bitcoin. Crear Bitcoins requiere una cierta cantidad de trabajo para cada bloque de monedas. Esta cantidad se ajusta automáticamente por la red para que los Bitcoins siempre sean creados a un ratio predecible y limitado. Tus Bitcoins se guardan en tu billetera digital, que te resultará familiar si usas banca digital. Cuando transfieres Bitcoins, una firma electrónica es añadida. Pasados unos minutos, la transacción es verificada por el minero y es almacenada permanente y anónimamente por la red. El software de Bitcoin es completamente abierto y cualquiera puede revisar el código. Bitcoin está cambiando las finanzas de la misma manera que la web ha cambiado el periodismo. Cuando cualquiera tiene acceso al mercado global, florecen grandes ideas. Miremos algunos ejemplos de cómo los Bitcoins están usándose hoy en día. Puedes comprar videojuegos, regalos, libros, servidores y calcetines de alpaca. Existen varias casas de cambio donde puedes intercambiar tus Bitcoins por dólares, euros y más. Los Bitcoins son una gran forma para que pequeños negocios y autónomos reciban publicidad. No cuesta nada empezar a aceptarlos, no hay cargos o comisiones y recibirás negocio adicional de la economía Bitcoin. Para tus primeros Bitcoins y más información, visita weusecoins.com.
Bueno, ahora voy a enseñar algunas imágenes de los dedos de Simpsons. Now I'll show some pictures of the fingers of Simpson. The 4 fingers, los 4 dedos y 5 dedos de Dios. The 4 fingers and 5 fingers of God of Simpsons.
The 13th of March.
Right now, there are more people on the internet than there were on the planet in 1960.
We're raising money.
And it's easier to be discovered than ever before.
It takes a full team to make each one of our videos.
But the internet needs better software to help us reward one another for our work.
Advertisers value you differently. They say that 1,000 of you is only worth $6.
Any help is very much appreciated.
Please fund this project.
We need your help.
son. Isn't that enough?
Inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret procedures. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Face the facts, join our hands, make a stand. It's time to gather plans, get the shot, take the chance. Till there is no one left, stay correct to the death. They can't ever break a freedom, we will never let them. The corrupt politics is killing the system. Cynicism is it, and it's everything that you witness. They tell you what to think, make you believe that they're the realness. They feed us full of lies, and yet we always forgive them. Huh? It's all conspiracy, and if you're free to enter it, you're the puppet. The government's pulling strings from above you. It's time for the introduction to truth, and let's start a movement. We've all been brainwashed, they believe that we all are stupid. We believe in what we see and whatever our ears are hearing. But if you look close, listen, gather your own opinion, you'll understand all the lies, lines and what's between them. This word is not your oyster, this word is a fucking prison. Come on! What's happening in our nation? No one will stand up for the fear of assassination. So they strip us of everything. We stand there and just take it. We're scared to make a stand, a false flag operation. Research Illuminati, find out by 9/11. You see they line their pockets, don't believe the lies they tell you. Find and seek the truth, realize we need to do whatever it is we can to protect our livelihood. It's time for us to prove whether conspiracy or not. They owe some explanations to the questions that we got. What are the skull and bones? What is lying beneath all these secretive meats? Got you lying between your teeth. What's with the Bilderberg and burning your effigies? I'm praying to Lucifer. How Satanist can you be? While all of the time praying you believing in the peace just to keep up appearances within Christianity. Come on. Stay strong when they try to shut us down or turn around, let us storm them. We got the warnings, let us march from the morning through the night. We gon' fight and close the eye and overthrow all these damn secret societies. Why we gotta stand for the new world proprieties? The evidence is clear, we're naive to the lies. Illuminati wolves killing sheep in the night.